Hey everybody, and welcome to Q&A Wednesday, where I answer the questions that you have about your health and fitness goals. Now, I know this is not the normal background to when I do Q&A Wednesday, but since I'm talking about food and nutrition and have some props, I figured I just might as well use it. So, really quickly, we're just going to talk a little bit. I get lots and lots of questions about, well, can't I have bread? And so we're going to talk a little bit about the good, the bad, and the ugly. And whether or not bread is a good option, and maybe even some substitutions for it that might be a better choice for you. So let's talk a little bit about bread. Now, we talk a lot about sugar, and we've in the past talked a little bit about how you have to really pay attention to ingredients, because a lot of things that you don't normally think about do contain sugar. Well, here's the other issue. The other issue is that if you are eating a bunch of just regularly processed, like white bleached flour, you're technically eating sugar. Because what do you think that processed food turns into in your system? So let's talk about what are some decent options, some fallacies or some myths you might think about bread, and then what your best options are when it comes to making some bread choices. Because I get it. Like I used to remember thinking that a sandwich was healthy, right? That was way better than eating a bunch of like sweets and sugar and pasta, and that's just a healthy option. Unfortunately, it's not what we think it is. So first of all, I really quickly want to address gluten, because gluten tends to be something that gets kind of tossed around, and the problem itself is not actually the gluten itself. However, let me go into a little bit deeper here. So they usually say that if you have celiac disease, that obviously you should stay away from gluten. Well, same thing with Hashimoto's. If you do have Hashimoto's, thyroiditis like I do, we do stay away from gluten. The problem in our country isn't necessarily the gluten itself, it's how it's processed, how the flour is processed to the point where it becomes a nutrient that isn't necessarily, your body doesn't perceive it correctly. It perceives it as something foreign, and so it gets through your system, and then if you've heard of leaky gut, gluten has been shown to be one of the issues or the products that tends to cause those issues. So just keep that in mind. I personally feel like most people should predominantly be gluten-free, just because gluten in general causes inflammation. In other countries, the flour and the gluten is processed much differently. It's a several day process versus here it's a couple hour process. So just like other things such as tofu, soy here, it's just not as healthy as it is in other countries like, say, Japan, where they just process it much differently. So let's really quickly talk a little bit about bread. Most of you probably already know that great big loaf of white bread in your store is not your best option. It's just way too processed, right? It's got a lot of sugar in it on top of the flour, and it's just not really made as healthy. However, you really got to pay attention to what's in each product, because sometimes we think that, hey, we're making healthier choices when we're really not. So we're gonna start today with something that some of my children use. That's why I have it here. I know, my daughter walked in my room and go, why do we have all this bread? So this is just a wheat bread. A lot of people say, well, if it's more whole grain, it's a better option. Well, let's talk about what you find when you look at the ingredient list. So when I teach people to look at products, I don't just necessarily teach them to look at the nutrition label. It's not a bad option, but it honestly just does not give me enough information. Kind of like just depending on the scale for your progress. All right, so the thing that I look at, number one, is the ingredient list. Now, if you've never read an ingredient list before, the first thing you have to understand is whatever the first product or ingredient is on the list, that product contains the most of it proportionally. So in this instance, enriched unbleached wheat flour is the number one ingredient on this list. Now, again, they make it sound like it's a better option. It's wheat flour, right? It's not white flour, it's not bleached. Doesn't matter. It's still, your body responds to it the same way. So even though these kind of products like a wheat option tend to sound a little healthier, the problem is that they're really not. They're still processed down to a point where it's going to break down into sugar. I actually heard once somebody say you can't look at bread as a staple. You have to look at it as a dessert. Bread and pasta, they're not staples. They might taste savory, but they're basically, because they're turning to sugar in your system, they're dessert. So if you kind of look at it it's kind of a different view on how this product is. But if you start reading all the ingredients in here, there's a lot of things in here that aren't necessarily healthier for you. So paying attention to this would be really important. It's not the worst thing in the world, but number one, if you're diabetic, you definitely should be staying away from most bread. But just in general, if you're trying to get healthier, lean out, burn some fat, bread is just not really a good option for you. So just keep that in mind, especially something that's just a cheap, option at the store that maybe we had as kids, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, probably something you should stay away from. The next one down is the multigrain. Now, while it's definitely, look at it, it's smaller, it's a little more expensive. It's multigrain, right? That's a much better option. Isn't that what they tell us to eat? We're supposed to stick with multigrain. again, if you start to look at the ingredient list, you're gonna come up with some surprises, things that you didn't expect. So on this one, what is the first ingredient? Whole wheat flour. Again, it's wheat, but again, the only difference is it's not bleached. So it's still going to contain gluten. It's still going to turn to sugar immediately in your system. So it's not as healthy as you think it is. While it might be a little bit better, it's not good, right? If you pay attention to that. So there's one other thing that I wanted to make sure that you understood in here. This contains brown sugar, right? A lot of wheat breads contain molasses, which again is sugar, because of course that's where the coloring comes from. So, just because it sounds like it's a great option, please make sure that you're paying attention to the ingredient list so that you know that this is still probably not your best option. If you're diabetic or if you are really trying to burn some fat, this is something I would stay away from. All right, next one down. We're gonna talk about Dave's Killer Bread because I get a lot of interest in this. And again, we're kind of going from like horrible to not horrible to still not wonderful, right? Because again, the first thing I'm gonna tell people to do is to turn around and look at the ingredient list, because really the nutrition label doesn't tell you anything, right? It might tell you how many grams of this and that, and it's not always true. It can be as much as 25% off, right? Because when they figure out the calories and all these things, they're doing it in a vacuum. It's not compared to anything. Who eats just bread and nothing else? Most of us have something on it, whether it's toast, so we've got butter, or making a sandwich. So again, what it says, it just is not good enough information. I really want to know what they're putting in my product, what kind of ingredients they're including. So again, the first ingredient on here is organic whole wheat flour. Now it's sprouted flour, so that's a little bit different of a ball game. However, it's still not phenomenal, right? The next thing I want you to pay attention to on this is this one contains organic cane sugar. Now, one of my favorite things that people say, well, it's organic, so that makes it healthy, right? I don't care if it's organic, if it's natural. Now, obviously something that's more of a natural sugar that comes in a product, say like maple syrup or honey, is definitely a better option when it comes to how it's structured chemically. But your body doesn't know any different. It still treats it as sugar. It still spikes insulin. You're still storing it in your adipose tissue because your blood can't handle that much sugar in its system. So again, not your best option. The other thing, again, I want you to pay attention to in here. Remember we just talked about molasses? Now it's organic molasses. But again, it's still molasses, it's still sugar. So you can't just rely, they use these buzzwords to make it sound phenomenal. Like it's non-GMO sugar. Okay, but it's still sugar. It's a protein cookie, but it still contains sugar. So you really have to come down to what are you looking for? What is it that makes it a healthy product versus an unhealthy product? What are we looking for? So again, better than the last two loaves that we looked at, but still not phenomenal. I don't do a lot of bread, period, just because, again, I tend to be gluten-free. However, when I do some sort of bread, I have a couple of options that I look at. And the first one is Ezekiel Bread. The reason being is, number one, it's flourless. So I am not getting the same breakdown of flour breaking down into sugar immediately in my system. So that's a little bit different. The other thing I like about this is it's a sprouted bread. It's made a lot differently. You actually have to keep it refrigerated or frozen until you use it, because otherwise it will actually go bad pretty quickly. Even in my fridge, if I leave it in my fridge very long, if I don't eat it quickly enough, it will start to mold. So keep in mind that that's because it's fresh. Have you ever noticed that when they keep stuff shelf stable, there's a reason? They've got something in it. They've got some additives and preservatives that's keeping it from going bad. If you've ever heard that, like, I heard once that Hostess Twinkies would outlive cockroaches during a nuclear whatever. And I'm like, well, that's disgusting. That anything, or finding a McDonald's hamburger in the back of the closet 7 years later and it still looks like a hamburger, that's pretty disgusting, right? Anything that's a fresh food has to be preserved in a different way, such as your refrigerator or freezer. Let's look at the ingredient list, because again, that's where you're gonna get the most information about whether or not it's something that you should eat. So the first thing that it contains is organic sprouted wheat. Now notice it doesn't say flour because it's flourless. Again, it's sprouted. One of the reasons it has to be refrigerated is because it's sprouted grains. It also contains sprouted barley, sprouted millet, malted barley. So again, everything in it is actually an actual grain, a sprouted grain. So it's a completely different. Now here's the deal. I get it. You're gonna be like, I just don't like the taste. It doesn't taste good. Ah. You know what? Your body becomes so addicted to the processed foods, the commercially prepared foods. It's really hard because your taste buds adapt, right? It tastes good. You love those things because they have been studied. The research and development team at whatever company has gone through and they have made sure it is at the bliss point. It tastes It's hyper palatable, which means that you love the flavor because they've made it perfect. It's the right mouth feel, it's the right mouth flavor, it's not too much, it's not too little, it's so that you keep eating it because I want you to purchase more of it. When you start to go with a healthier option, it's going to taste different. You're going to have to change your taste buds by stop eating the garbage so that your body doesn't expect it and it's not addicted to it, and you're gonna have to go with the healthier versions. So it's still bread. Like, I get excited that I can still eat bread and it's not horrific for me. So that would be more of my choice. Ezekiel, this brand, also makes tortillas, as well as, don't do the hamburger buns, they're not that great. However, the English muffins are awesome as well. You're going to find these again in the freezer section, in the health food freezer section at your local grocery store. Even our Walmart here locally carries it, so keep that in mind. All right, the last thing I want to talk about is you can always find substitutes. One of my favorites recently, and I don't have the box anymore, are these Outer Aisle Gourmet cauliflower thins, sandwich thins. So they contain cauliflower, and I know some people don't like cauliflower, but there are other alternatives. But it also contains like mozzarella cheese. I use these as like my little mini pizza crusts for some different things. They're phenomenal, they're easy, they're healthy for you. Now, let me just go back one more time and say these are all processed. So realize this is not something that I'm gonna put in my diet all day, every day. It's something that I kind of use sparingly. This is the moderation, right? It's not the sugar and the garbage. Yeah, you can have those every once in a while, but those are not a daily option. You can't say moderation in all sugar because I'm gonna be completely addicted to it and I'm not gonna reach my goal. Even though these are processed, it's still of eat this, not that, because this is a healthier version of something that I really truly love to eat. So if you have a product you've come up with that works great for you, please share it. You know, the whole goal is to give people options. I want people to find their groove a little faster than it took me. It's taken me almost a decade, right? So I want you to be able to find alternatives that are great for you, that work, that taste good, and then we need to share that information. That's why we do what we do. So, you know what? I get my very best ideas from you. If you have a question, if you have something you want to share, please leave a comment below. You can also message me directly at Facebook Messenger. Just don't be creepy. Also, if you want to find all the other Q&A Wednesdays I've ever done, subscribe to my YouTube channel under Fillmore Fitness, and you can see every question I've ever answered, as well as every Meals with Melissa to give you some great, healthy, and tasty meal ideas. Have an incredible day, you guys. Until next time, that is Q&A Wednesday. Talk to you later.